Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Level Agency's Test, Learn, Grow podcast. I'm your host for today, Dale Reether, Digital Marketing Lead here at Level Agency. Today, I'm joined by three amazing guests who all have a tremendous amount of experience in B2B marketing. Carol Everson, Area Managing Partner and CMO at Chief Outsiders, Jeff Loeb, Partner and CMO at Chief Outsiders, and our very own Dave Baps, VP of Agency Development here at Level Agency. Today, we're going to deep dive on ABM strategies for the new B2B landscape by touching on the current state of how B2B buyers buy and how that has changed in recent years, challenges we often see companies face when shifting to an account-based approach to new customer acquisition, and how companies should be thinking about ABM as we head into 2024. And with that, I'd love to welcome in our guests, Carol, Jeff, Dave. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for taking the time to join me today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me, Dale.
Absolutely. And Dave, people hear from us all the time. If you're an avid listener, you hear mine and Dave's voices constantly. So I'd really like to start today by hearing a bit more about Carol and Jeff's own journeys to becoming CMOs at Chief Outsiders. So Carol, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your story in Chief Outsiders. How'd you get here and what gets you excited about the topic of account-based marketing?
So I recently joined Chief Outsiders about 3.5 years ago, and all of us are former practitioners, mostly have had CMO roles in other companies. And over time, we ultimately got to the point that we realized we would be very valuable helping small and mid-market companies pull in the services and capabilities that we developed in some of our larger and corporate roles. So happy to be here and excited. I've done a lot with account-based marketing. I've also been in sales and marketing myself. So the notion of orchestration between sales and marketing is pretty key to me.
Awesome. Appreciate that background. I'm super excited to hear from both you and Jeff and the perspectives that you have talking to so many different companies as fractional CMOs and just hearing some of the stories around the challenges, success stories that you see with a lot of these. So Jeff, I want to turn it over to you too. Just to hear a little bit more about your background, how you got here today, what gets you excited about ABM.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been with Chief Outsiders for about 5 years now, and I really focus exclusively on SaaS companies and technology companies, which is a really good fit for an ABM strategy. I've been in marketing for about 25 years, really always in technology, startups, large companies, small companies, and have really kind of seen the whole kind of maturity and growth of the industry, and seen different go-to-market strategies, which is what ABM really is to me. And ABM just is a it's often referred to as zero waste marketing because it's so hyper focused on your ideal customer profile and the orchestration and alignment between sales and marketing. And I think it's just it's a great, a very effective strategy in the time period we're in right now.
Couldn't agree more. Well said. You really hit on something that I want to start off with, where you said you've seen the maturity and the changes that have happened over the past 25 years when it comes to B2B marketing. I'd really like to start digging into the meat of this. And I think a great place to start is the why before we get into the how. So I think the reason ABM has really hit the forefront of B2B marketing and just revenue generation overall and go to market is because the B2B buying landscape has massively changed over the past couple of years. Buyers are doing more research anonymously, and that's making traditional lead gen tactics that we saw work probably in 2010 to 2015 a lot less effective. I wanted to dig a little bit into what has changed. Like, why is that? What are we seeing in the B2B buying landscape that has made these lead gen tactics less and less effective?
I would argue, I think, Jeff, you're going to cover one piece, but what I would argue is that the buying process itself has gotten more complex with the number of buyers that participate in the buying process. So, for example, think of a technology buy. You've got the CTO, you've got the chief security officer, you have reviews from legal, the number of players that are involved in a purchase decision of any sizable asset, especially if it's technology-based, is significant. And those players aren't normally the players that you walk into a sales conversation with, but they can submarine your deal. So ensuring that you're reaching all the buyers in the buying process is something that we had to worry about that before, but it's just gotten so much more complex.
Absolutely. I think another piece of this is people, now that they've been getting marketed to for so long, know what's going to happen when they fill out a form and become a quote unquote lead. Like, that's triggering them to get into a sales motion, even whenever they're not ready. So whenever we're putting up gates behind, in front of things and forms, like, we're actually just driving people away from actually consuming the content and getting the value that we want to give them, because they know that as soon as they submit that form, they're going to get 10 spammy marketing emails and probably someone calling their cell phone. I think that fundamentally has really changed the way that we need to think about how we're presenting content to people, and how we're ultimately measuring success if we aren't doing it based off of how many lead forms have we got filled out.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I marvel at the success of the inbound movement over the last decade, led by HubSpot specifically, but really kind of instantiating this idea, which we now take for granted, which a dozen years ago, was being evangelized, by a little tiny company, HubSpot, and the whole notion that we should be publishers, we should develop a lot of content. People will find us, they'll come to us, then we can nurture them along. It's been kind of an awesome movement, but like a lot of movements, the pendulum tends to overswing. And I would say that certainly inbound it remains incredibly important and has to be part of the mix. It can't be everything though. As you were saying, people know what happens when they fill out a form, and they know what kind of happens in that motion, and it isn't as effective any longer. It's harder and harder to build out the SEO content that gets people to your pages, especially if you're a smaller company, maybe competing against very deep resourced companies. So ABM, that's one of the interesting ways that ABM fits in, is it allows us to be hyper targeted and really go after. And the other challenge of an inbound strategy is you get a lot of noise, right? You get a lot of people filling out forms that aren't in your ICP, that become clutter, and noise in the system. So the whole idea of kind of flipping the funnel with ABM, and rather than kind of targeting that broad set of inbound, people that have raised their hands, let's target just those companies that are most interesting to us. And as Carol was saying, you have these buying groups, so let's target the specific buyers and influencers in a very targeted way, and it makes for an efficient process. And just one final thought here: the other kind of key thing that ABM addresses, in terms of the evolution of go-to-market, also is the integration and coordination and alignment between sales and marketing. So every organization always struggles with the alignment between sales and marketing. And ABM is an awesome way to orchestrate those activities and drive really good alignment.
If I could hop in and add one more thing, people are forming opinions about companies regardless of what we're doing. With all of the review sites that are out there, with Capterra, G2 Crowd, all of those sites and online reviews, the buyers that you're interested in most likely know something about you. And it may not be something you want, or even may not be accurate, but it's really important to understand that, back to the notion of things have changed and people are forming opinions about you that have nothing to do with your organization reaching out to them.
Totally. I mean, the amount of trust that has come from communities building online, and that's essentially what G2 and Capterra is, right? It's a community of people looking for softwares or technologies, and they're trusting peer recommendations more and more as opposed to what the brands are saying. So I think that's a really good point, Carol. And I think some of the stuff that Jeff was talking about is a really good segue into what are some of the challenges that the marketers face when adopting ABM. Two things that I heard, Jeff, were one is goals, two is alignment. I think goals have really made us shift the pendulum the other way, as you were describing, because whenever the goal is to, we have to get 5,000 leads because we know that X percent of them convert to an opportunity and X percent of them convert to customers, which is usually a really low percentage. In order to hit that goal, what do you have to do? You have to expand the market somehow. So that's how you start to get a lot of that waste in unqualified leads, which I think ultimately leads to misalignment and tension between marketing and sales. So those are some of the challenge, and I think it's a big challenge to get people to shift away from that, because the goals for marketing have been leads and MQLs for so long, and then it's like, okay, we're just gonna dump it over to you, sales, and you work these leads, and then you got sales coming back to you saying, hey, Dale, these leads suck. So I would love to dig in a little bit more to just some of the challenges that you all often see when it comes to kind of shifting the mindset shift that needs to take place to go from a more inbound lead gen strategy to a more demand gen and account-based approach.
I can hop in with one of the challenges that I'm seeing. Depending upon the solutions that you're selling, if you try and tie to revenue, which is what ultimately you would want to tie to booked revenue. When you have a product or service that maybe has a 1-year sales cycle, even a 6-month sales cycle, it's really hard to understand how to measure ABM and how to make sure that everyone has the patience to see the positive outcomes a year after you start the process. You have to look at what are the interim metrics that get you there and line up alignment with the executive team, with the head of sales, et cetera, that, we're playing for the long haul. Here are our interim metrics, but at the end of the day, this is really what we're trying to make happen. And that can be a challenge for companies that are used to kind of the, what's my ROI in 60 days type of approach.
Yeah, and building off of that point, which is an awesome point. If you think of traditional flow inbound, you get a hand raiser, call it an MQI, marketing qualified inquiry. It may not fit in the ICP. They may be top of the funnel. They may not have enough buyer's intent. We've gotten good at holding on to those leads within marketing, nurturing them until we have a lead score that promotes them to an MQL. We pass those off as sales ready leads. So what we're handing to sales is something sales ready, right? So that's what sales would consider to be a quality lead. Now with ABM, in some ways, and of course there's some nuances around this, so we can talk about with intent data, et cetera. But with ABM, we're reaching even further up in terms of the buying cycle, where we're reaching out to people cold. And they may or may not be in market, and in most cases they won't be in market. You often hear the statistic, 2-3% of companies are in market at any point in time. So we can easily identify what companies fit our ideal customer profile, what the right personas are, but we still are reaching out to people that may not have an active buying cycle. So to Carol's point, a lot of the people that we touch, most of the people that we touch are not going to go straight to a meeting. Some will, but some it'll be laying the groundwork for meetings that are going to happen a year from now, and making that connection and having convincing executive teams to have the patience, that we're on the right track, and being able to show like the early signs of engagement and success, are all real big challenges.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something even in our own journey at Level, I'm responsible for sales and marketing. And so in the end, the buck kind of stops with me. And we're very focused on revenue and pipeline as a kind of organizing principle when it comes to metrics. But to the point that we're sort of beating around right now, the the need for patience to allow for the marketing to actually translate into sales qualified pipeline is really needed. And in order to, I think, placate folks, and to a certain extent, creating that visibility in those metrics that show progression before you see pipeline is so essential. And Dale, do you want to talk a little bit about some of what we've been doing over the course of the past couple of months to try to create that visibility and really that confidence in what we're doing today and that it's actually working?
Yeah, I think this has been the hardest part, is trying to convince higher level leadership that something is working when we can't point to traditional lead gen metrics that they're very used to. So I think we've been trying to show those early indicators of success. If we have a content strategy on LinkedIn, what does the engagement look like? How many more followers are we getting? How much are they engaging with the content? What are the firmographics of those new followers and engagements to show that we're engaging the right people and that the message resonates? And I think, from an account-based standpoint, is showing when we target these companies that are within this segment, say our B2B ICP, which very much falls within software and technology as well. How are the stuff that we're doing, how is that impacting how many accounts are moving from different perceived stages by showing how much they're engaging with our website or how much they're engaging with advertisement? And I think it's really a shift in metrics that you need to adopt, especially higher in the funnel, to show that success. And the alignment on that has to be there, or else you're speaking two different languages between your marketing team and your executive team, which causes a lot of friction.
And creating some visibility around engagement with the right audience. I think part of what we've been really pressing on is that question around audience, like who is the right customer for us today? How do we define that ICP? How do we get more specific about the type of client that we think we can win and that we can grow with over time? I think that oftentimes companies kind of are dismissive around the importance of that work. Oh, it's easy. Our customer kind of looks like this. Well, if you really press on that and enforce some additional depth to answering that question, I found that a lot of executives really struggle with answering the second level questions on the topic of who the customer is. And if you can't get to that level, you're going to struggle in your marketing, and ultimately you're going to struggle with your retention, even if you do win that business.
Yeah, that opens up a really interesting conversation because you're 100% right. So we're targeting particular companies in particular personas, and then it's with a message. So really understanding the use cases that we're focused on, and then aligning the message. I think one of the challenges that I see as I implement ABM programs, it's developing the conversation flow, beginning to end in the ABM journey. Because the way that I often think of the kind of orchestrated journey is you may start off with, it's across multiple channels. So you're starting off maybe with some advertising, LinkedIn advertising, for instance, for awareness. And then maybe you move into a series of marketing email touches. Maybe you move into some executive LinkedIn touches. Maybe you move into kind of a series of sales touches. Maybe you have some direct mail stuff, right? So you have this whole series of stuff that we want to create a really good buyer's journey, around, and we want to have a nice narrative that connects everything. So which means that you've got to construct this conversation, this story that might have multiple paths based on personas beginning to end, and align on it. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially when a lot of sales teams and kind of SDR type folks have a lot of their value traditionally has come from developing something that works for them. They'll often have the freedom to kind of develop a storyline that works for them. So what Rep A is doing might be very different than Rep B. So it's hard to strike that balance between giving them the freedom to, express their personality, but also stay within the context of this conversation.
And Jeff, what you're talking about, I think, keep me honest on this, is really a narrative as it relates to your selling message and how you're communicating with a prospective buyer. I think equally important is, what are some of the distinctive points of view that you're going to offer to those that might not necessarily be in market, who are in more of a learning mode, that might take what you have to share, learn from it, associate their learning with you or your brand, and have you top of mind when it comes time to start to think more as a buyer.
But that is, I agree completely. And because we haven't talked at all about intent data, maybe we can get into that later, but because we're reaching out to people cold, they may or may not be familiar with our brand, right? So what salespeople will always say is, goodness, it's so much easier to connect with somebody if they know us, if they know our company, if they're familiar with our brand. So a lot of that initial impressions that we make is just kind of connecting our brand, to their story. So ideally, by the time in the program we get to the point where salespeople are doing outreach, the ideal reaction is, gosh, I've been hearing a lot about you lately. You guys must be really interesting, right? So having a message that is clear and resonates and gets tied to our brand promise is
absolutely. And I think one of the interesting evolutions when I think about brand and the power of word of mouth, especially in a platform like LinkedIn, is I think that there's so much power in the personal brand, especially of senior leaders in an organization. And to the extent that leader or set of leaders can offer a point of view that can be become a part of a community in a place like LinkedIn, that point of view and the power of the personal brand has associative breadth to the actual company and the brand of the whatever business is being represented by that personal brand. So there's such a power between those two, and I think that people on LinkedIn respond much more in a much more direct and authentic way to people than they do to brand.
It's interesting. You mentioned that. I was working with a client. I was doing an analysis in a professional services company, and one CEO, two competitors. One CEO hasn't posted anything since December of last year, and the other had 27 posts year to date. A lot of it was LinkedIn articles hosted on LinkedIn, 4-minute read, 3-minute read, all relevant topics, really high energy. And surprisingly, they're growing much faster than the other firm. So it's a testament to exactly what you just said.
Absolutely. And when you have 5 to 10 people that are leaders of that company speaking the same language and have a slightly different perspective based on what their job function is, it just compounds and compounds. And the people that are doing content really well and the companies that are doing content really well on LinkedIn right now, it's not coming from the brand. The brand just posts about like updates and stuff. Like you see their people consistently talking about it. And I think you can even see that trend materializing itself in advertising products too, with the onset of LinkedIn thought leader ads, where you can actually promote you can promote from the personal account rather than the brand account. And our teams have already seen a huge success with those thought leader ads. I think just because the perception that it's a person talking and not.
I just want to have one comment on that. I was the CMO of a B2B media company, and we did a lot of thought leadership posting in a variety of ways in our media properties. And one caution is to ensure that that content really is worthy of that senior leader and that it really is something that the people you're trying to reach care about. I cannot tell you the number of assets that we got that we had to go back to clients and say, this is not going to work for you, or we simply can't call this brochure a thought leadership piece, so we can't post it in our resources. We need to come up with something different for you. So it is really key to understand what are the thought leadership lines of thinking that back your overall business and your product value proposition so that you're both saying something interesting and guiding people toward your solution at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that matters to the audience, right? You have to have
Yeah.
something to
Oh, yeah.
say.
And there's a flip side to that coin as well, which we need to have something really interesting to say. It has to be meaningful and resonant, but it also matters a little bit about who's saying it. And I'm saying this in this context that, kind of going back to the idea of what are some of the challenges in ABM today and what are the challenges that we're overcoming. The world, the B2B world is so noisy right now. We're so bombarded with emails and LinkedIn messages and phone calls that everything is getting filtered. So one of the big challenges is to try to figure out how to break through. So we have to have the right content to break through. And also executives can help break through as well, because it's just a reality that, if I get an email from a salesperson, right, I'm probably not even going to read it. I'm probably going to delete it. But if I get an email from the CEO of a company, I'm more likely to give it a little bit more time. So a big part of what I like to include in any type of orchestrated program is some executive level touch, usually via LinkedIn, where it's an outreach from the CEO. And we have stats, right? So our salespeople will also do LinkedIn outreach, and they may get, a relatively low percent of people that actually will connect, where the CEO will often get 30 to 50% of the LinkedIn people will connect to them. So it's a useful strategy.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Jeff. And I would say too, just to round out this point, I think it's invaluable to attend things like major conferences and events in a particular industry. And, using one as an example, Dale and I attended the Forrester B2B event this past year. And it's just such a fantastic reminder about the number of choices that are available to a prospective buyer in today's world, and just the amount of noise. The buzzwords that are used are so pervasive. Dale and I walked around the event and talked to other vendors, and you almost got lost in the jargon, and you'd leave and you'd be like, what do they really do?
The amount of times that we heard RevOps, demand gen, AI, intent was like, it was every booth you walk past at RevOps, like it was some variation of the same 4 words, and then you would talk to them, and it was confusing to even get cut through to like what it is they actually do. So I think it was just a good reminder for us to like simplify the message, because there's so much buzzword noise out there right now.
Yeah, and just kind of building off of that, right? It's such a great point. ABM can be such a great strategy, but good marketing is good marketing, right? At the end of the day, you need to have an awesome message and an awesome value proposition.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's just an appreciation also just for the amount of noise and the amount of the sheer volume of vendors that are trying to angle for the attention of a prospective buyer. So for me, it's just enlightening in some ways to put yourself in the shoes of a buyer. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's driving some of the trends that we're seeing, right? Like increasingly, there's more research that's being conducted by the individual that because they don't want to deal with a salesperson. They want to get the information that they need and that they're interested in on their terms. They want to they rely on word of mouth because they trust it, right? They trust their friends and their colleagues around making a purchasing decision more than they do somebody who's selling to them. So, and I don't think that those trends are going anywhere. So I think that the notion of like trying to be more customized and targeted with our marketing and our sales in a way that is going to create a better experience, and one that has better marketing associated with it and a more prescriptive message, is what buyers want today.
And just building on that kind of credibility point that you were mentioning, I always talk about that we as a vendor have the lowest level of credibility, right? The lowest level of credibility. Think of how does every press release, ever written start? Acme Corporation, the leading provider of, right? Everybody's a leading provider. So we have the least level of credibility. Who has more credibility? Well, there's influencers and analysts that have the next level. But as you mentioned, the folks that have the highest level of credibility are their peers and their network and other the people that are like them. So how do you then leverage that, right? Because we need to channel that credibility. So within an ABM program, the way I tap into that is through things like the content that we share and we produce. We'll have a lot of customer testimonial videos, for instance. So if you're interested, hear how somebody just like you at a company just like yours is getting value from this solution. So having that third party validation, whether it's a research report from a Forrester, whether it's an industry report, whether it's a customer giving a testimonial, those are all kind of key ways to tap into that credibility.
I've also even used users of a solution to reach out to maybe someone they might know, identify via LinkedIn, and put in a good word as part when you're in a really one-to-one type of a scenario. It's worth it. You can't do that at scale, but you can do that in more the one-to-one world.
I think another way is to have people who are experts or seen as having a position of authority on a particular topic offer that viewpoint, right? So having CMOs get together and talk about how they think about account-based marketing and how they're working.
For example,
clients today, as an arbitrary example, is a really great way to share, not sell, but share insights and value around a topic that should be highly relevant to any B2B company today.
Absolutely. And I think, that just continues to build on what Jeff said of like, good marketing is good marketing at the end of the day. ABM is a lot of things to a lot of people. And I think this kind of can cap off the challenge section and move us into how people should be thinking about ABM in 2024. And Carol, I'd love to get your perspective on this, because I know in our conversations leading up to this, we've talked about this a lot. What is the foundation? We talked about how a challenge is that people try to start with the tech first, right? And really, in what we talked about here today, you got to start with the strategy first and the go-to-market plan. What makes a good account-based strategy, and what are the things that people need to be thinking about before they just go and buy the tech? Because you've seen it, I've seen it. A lot of times people, they buy the tech and they think, bam, we're doing ABM, we did it, everything's going to work. What do people need to be thinking about as a prerequisite to actually purchasing any type of tech or something?
The starting point has to be, what am I trying to accomplish as a business? What are sales, marketing, product together trying to accomplish? Are you trying to target a group of accounts in an industry for new solutions? Are you trying to, for example, expansion? I was working with a client that all they wanted to do initially was expand their current business with 8 accounts. They were selling into the pharmaceutical industry. And so their number of targets was very, very limited, but they're huge corporations with large numbers of potential buyers within the company. So defining what is it I'm trying to accomplish, and then what's the best way to get there. And we've all heard one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many. You have to look at that, but you also have to look at, okay, within our companies, technically, what are we capable of doing? Are we able to be very complex, or do we have such a small team that we need to really carve out a small piece, start first, do that, prove in the value, and expand from there? So just really focusing on strategically, what am I trying to happen? Quantitatively, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve? And if we start there, that will allow you to back into, okay, now based on that, what do I need to do from a technology perspective? I've talked to 2 companies that recently, in the past couple of months, that went out and bought a platform. And then a couple months later, so we did ABM, but it didn't work out really well. We bought XYZ platform, and the results weren't great. And so we aren't doing ABM right now, but we really want to. We just can't figure out how. And it's because they didn't start with, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sales-led organizations, an account-based strategy really lends itself to it because it's so hard. You don't have that middle conversion point like you do with a product-led company. Like typically when I think product-led, I think the product's driving the demand solely. You have a product that people can test and try through a free trial or something like that and purchase it on your own without having to go through a sales process. So there's more of those like concrete conversion points in the middle that help you to see if there are early indicators of success. For a sales-led organization with a high price point service or product, like a digital marketing agency or, a fractional CMO agency, that's much more difficult because it's either like you're gating content, which we talked about earlier in this episode is not efficient. You're just putting up barriers to people actually getting value and seeing the message that you're putting out into the world. Or at the bottom of the funnel, it's like, let's talk about becoming a customer. There is no middle point. So that middle is very messy and hard to gauge. What is their movement at the top and the middle of the funnel? What are those early indicators of success? And I think the right tech can help you start to see that. And I think that's where Jeff kind of wanted to start pulling on the thread of intent data. But it's also like, what companies are on your website? How many times? How much are they engaging with your content and your LinkedIn profile? Like the right tech can help you get there. I'm not saying that ABM isn't right for a product-led organization. It absolutely is. But I think, in my opinion, that's what we were really missing whenever we tried to adopt this strategy at the beginning of the year without the right tech. Is like, okay, we got all this great awareness content out on LinkedIn. We can see some of the metrics around who's engaging with it, but like that middle piece just wasn't there to be able to show the metrics to the executive team around like, this is working, because the message was really just, we have to wait and see. And that's not a good enough answer whenever you're trying to prove marketing spend to an executive team.
So there's so many different threads to pull on here. Let me pull on one that has to do with the sales versus product led, and then we come back to technology. So, one of the key things that we're driving towards in an ABM program is getting a meeting, right? That's our first kind of real tangible sign of success, right? So we're driving all this engagement, and it's all towards having a meeting, and that's the hard part. Nowadays is how do we convince people to have a meeting with us, because they want to do all the research on their own. So they're not going to talk to us unless they're really ready. And in a product-led growth company, a lot of times that meeting can be a free trial or it could be a demo. So you've got this really strong thing to drive engagement. But for other types of organizations, like we were talking about agencies and chief outsiders and whatnot, you don't have that. So this is where this idea of a high value offer comes in. How do we cut through the noise and get people to engage with us and engage in a meeting? So one of the best practices is to have a high value offer, something kind of a really unique reason to meet with us. And there's different flavors of these. We can, you might have some unique data to share with them or research. But one of the areas that I'm pretty heavily involved in right now is doing different types of assessments. And what we've actually, at Chief Outsiders, we've actually built out what we call our Growth Gears assessment, which is a 16-question assessment that helps determine your readiness to grow. And it's a half-hour experience that we create that is really high value add because it shows the gaps and we provide recommendations. So the ability to create a high value offer is a really unique way of skinning that cat for sales-led organizations.
I think that's a great point, Jeff, because you think about that meeting for a high value purchase. If you're seriously in a buying scenario, that meeting is typically going to involve 3 to 5 people. That's a big effing deal, right?
Yeah, and like, in the context of this assessment or whatnot, it's even richer when you have 3 people because, right, one of a salesperson's challenge is recognizing that different stakeholders may have different points of view and trying to understand what those different points of view are. And that can come out in these discussions when you kind of go through these high value offer processes.
Yeah, I think that's a flavor of our own marketing that we're starting to figure out. I think that like the low value offer for a digital marketing agency is to go say, hey, I can go audit your paid campaigns. I mean, any agency can do that today. We might say we could do it better, but it's not that differentiating. So it's like, what can you offer? What can you create that is a lower value offer that will make that initial meeting really impactful and get those that are in it really engaged to want to work with you?
Yeah, exactly. And develop trust, right? So we all know that this process is a trust-based process. People want to work with people that they trust, and they want to feel like the solution provider is educating them and adding value. So if you can create a high value offer that builds that trust and gives you a vehicle to demonstrate expertise, can be really powerful.
I was just going to say an example. When I was at MasterCard with MasterCard Advisors, we actually would pull them in there at the consulting arm to do a profile of a bank's footprint in a market and compare their footprint to their competitors' footprints, the demographics of the two. We were showcasing the advisor services, but what we were really doing was pointing out the problems this bank had in this market from a debit card perspective and how ultimately we could help them tackle the same problem nationwide. People were blown away. If you can do some flavor of analysis that allows the customer to see insights that they had no view into, it turns the conversation completely.
That was so good, Carol. And that key word, insights, right? That the demonstrating insights and showing insights, that's what's so powerful.
And those were $1 billion deals plus. So we're spending a little time, effort, and money to get it done.
I think it's pretty fascinating too, because as I think about the message and that can run across marketing and then sales, I do believe that as you offer more distinctive and more compelling points of view through personal brands in B2B that can engage and build communities that understand who you are and by association who your company is, that there's less of a need for that type of a compelling offer because people are interested in what you have to say already. We haven't reached that point yet at Level, but I do believe that there is almost an inflection point where that can happen, and there's less of a need for that compelling offer that you're describing, Jeff. But I think it's a balance.
I think that's the promised land. I think that's when your point of view is so good that it's almost category defining. It's like when I'm in market, I'm going to that.
It's kind of interesting. What the thought that just came to mind is, do you guys remember back, in the .com days, and all of a sudden Cisco, right, the equipment manufacturer, became known as like the source of all knowledge on e-commerce and e-business, right? They had this huge e-business wing, that would educate companies on how to go to the internet, and this was from a hardware company, right? Right there, yeah. A thought that that maybe connects a few of these ideas together around the technology piece, the measurement and the startup piece is like, how do you get started, with an ABM program? Because my experience has been that it really kind of takes 6 months to start seeing results in terms of opportunities and like real pipeline, right? To Carol's point about having patience, right? So how do you kind of manage that, and where does the technology component, fit in? So I'm a big advocate of getting started with a minimum viable pilot, and my rule is, let's launch the MVP in 2 to 3 months, right? So we're going to get started with our first phase in 2 to 3 months. And my experience is, in order to kind of build momentum, you gotta do that, right? If you don't get going for 6 months, it's gonna die on the vine. So the first idea is this kind of minimum viable pilot. And as Carol was saying, technology is not the starting point. The pilot and the MVP is really when to get your orchestration down, to get the message down, your value proposition, the alignment between sales and marketing, all of those kinds of things. And there's some minimal technology. Maybe you need a marketing automation system, and CRM, but you don't need much more than that, really. And then as you go through, you can start layering in more sophisticated.
Yeah, Jeff, that is such a good point. I'm thinking back to an example with a company I had worked with, and we implemented ABM. It was a one-to-one environment. And as we were getting the meeting scheduled, we got the first meeting scheduled, and the sales team dropped the ball completely because it was a very high level C-suite conversations. We were advocating for CEO types executive from this client's end to the client. It got pushed down to the salesperson. The salespeople couldn't have the conversation. They all thought that their salespeople were solution selling executive salespeople that could have that detailed discussion with the CEO, have a meaningful dialogue, set up the next step in the process. Could not do it. And we scrapped the program immediately. And because we were in that MVP type of a phase, it was easy to scrap. We just said, okay, stop, everything. We hadn't spent money on tech. We hadn't gone overboard with it. And, took a step back and revisited everything. And then, it started again once we'd solved the problem. But you have the opportunity there to shake out something that you thought would work that simply isn't what everyone assumed it was.
And that ties in to one of the frameworks, Carol, that you kind of created, which was there's a certain level of go-to-market maturity that you need to be successful. And if you don't have that maturity across the sales and marketing side, you're not going to succeed. And it sounds like in that example, that maturity wasn't there. So to learn that early on.
Well, actually, that helped me create that framework. That experience, unfortunately, did.
I think that is a really good note to end on. Just the way to get started is really just get that alignment and nail down, what are you trying to do? Who are you trying to reach? Make sure you're aligned across marketing, sales, product before you invest in some fancy, expensive tech product. Because I think you're going to trip and fall at that point if that's where you start. So, Carol, Jeff.
A shameless self-promotion here. In case you weren't listening just now, if you need a framework to utilize to get started, sounds like Carol.
And we even have an ebook online about ABM on ChiefOutsiders.com. So yes, we have the framework in the ebook that Jeff and I did.
I think we can share that in the chat as part of the podcast when we drop it and share it on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. When we post this on our site, we'll definitely link out to Carol's ebook. That's a great call out, Dave. Go check that out.
Testimony ebook.
Awesome.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate the time and the expertise that the two of you have shared over the course of the past 55 minutes.
It's our pleasure. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thank you.